In the shadowed corridors of Windsor Castle, where every whispered conversation could change the fate of a nation, one man held secrets that could shatter the very foundation of the British monarchy. For 12 years, Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell had stood silent, watching, waiting, protecting. But on a rain-soaked Tuesday morning in March 2024, everything changed. A single gesture, barely noticeable to the untrained eye, would expose a web of deception that reached the highest echelons of royal power, targeting the future king of England himself. The morning mist clung to the ancient stones of Windsor Castle like ghostly fingers, reluctant to release their grip as the sun struggled through the March clouds. Royal Protection Officer James Mitchell adjusted his earpiece for the third time in 5 minutes, a nervous habit that had developed over his 12 years of service. At 42, he possessed the kind of weathered face that spoke of countless hours spent scanning crowds for threats, his steel-gray eyes missing nothing as they swept across the castle grounds. James had seen 3 different monarchs during his tenure, witnessed the evolution of the royal family through scandals, celebrations, and everything in between. He thought he understood the intricate dance of palace politics, the carefully orchestrated public appearances, and the delicate balance between duty and personal desire that defined royal life. He was wrong. The first sign that something was amiss came during the morning briefing in the oak-paneled security office. Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Webb, head of Royal Protection, stood before a wall of monitors displaying various camera feeds from around the castle. Her usually composed demeanor carried an edge of tension that James had rarely seen before. "We have a situation," she began without preamble. "Intelligence suggests a potential security breach involving someone with intimate knowledge of royal protocols." The room fell silent. 23 protection officers, each handpicked for their loyalty and discretion, leaned forward. James felt his pulse quicken. In his experience, the most dangerous threats rarely came from strangers with obvious weapons. They came from those who already had access, those who had earned trust only to betray it. Prince William will be hosting a private meeting this afternoon with several foreign dignitaries, Webb continued. Standard protocol would normally apply, but we've received intelligence that suggests this meeting may be targeted, not by external forces, but by someone within our circle of trust. James's mind immediately went to the faces he saw daily, fellow officers, palace staff, even members of the royal household who had been part of the institution for decades. The idea that one of them might pose a threat felt like a personal violation. "Sir," James raised his hand, his voice steady despite the churning in his stomach. "What kind of intelligence are we talking about? How credible is the source?" Webb's eyes met his directly. "Credible enough that we're implementing Protocol 7. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs. Protocol 7 was reserved for the most serious internal security threats, situations where the danger came not from outside, but from within the very system designed to protect the royal family. It meant everyone was suspect until proven otherwise, including the people sitting in this very room. Your assignments remain the same," Webb continued, "but I want everyone to be hypervigilant. Any unusual behavior, any deviation from normal patterns, any conversation that seems out of place, I want to know about it immediately." As the briefing ended and officers began filing out, Webb caught James's arm. "Mitchell, a word." They waited until the room was empty before she spoke again. "I'm assigning you to close protection for Prince William today. I know it's not your usual rotation, but I need someone I can trust absolutely." James nodded, though something in her tone made him uneasy. In 12 years of service, he had worked close protection for various members of the royal family, but Prince William was particularly significant. As the heir to the throne after his father, King Charles III, William represented not just the present, but the future of the monarchy. "Is there something specific I should know?" James asked. Webb hesitated, glancing toward the monitors that continued their silent surveillance of the castle grounds. "The intelligence we received, it specifically mentioned a signal. Some kind of prearranged communication that would indicate when to act." "What kind of signal?" "We don't know. That's what makes it so dangerous. It could be anything, a gesture, a phrase, even something as simple as a particular way of standing or moving. I need you to watch for patterns, for anything that seems coordinated or unusual. James felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. Protecting a member of the royal family was always serious business, but this felt different. This felt personal. The morning passed quietly as James took his position outside Prince William's private study. The prince was reviewing briefing documents for the afternoon meeting, occasionally making notes in the margins with his characteristic attention to detail. Through the partially open door, James could observe the future king at work, focused, methodical, completely unaware of the potential dangers swirling around him. At precisely 11:30, a palace aide approached with a tea service. James recognized her immediately. Margaret Thornley, 62 years old, 38 years of faithful service to the royal household. She had served tea to 3 generations of royalty, her loyalty beyond question. Yet as she set down the tray, James noticed something that made his blood run cold. Margaret's right hand, as she placed the sugar bowl, made a small but deliberate movement, 3 taps with her index finger against the silver surface. It was such a subtle gesture that anyone else would have dismissed it as nervousness or perhaps arthritis. But James had been specifically told to watch for signals. His training kicked in immediately. Without appearing to move, he activated the recording function on his body camera and shifted his position slightly to get a better view of both Margaret and the prince. Prince William barely looked up from his papers as he thanked her for the tea. "Will there be anything else, Your Royal Highness?" Margaret asked, her voice carrying the same respectful tone she had used for decades. "No, thank you, Margaret. That will be all." As she turned to leave, Margaret's eyes briefly met James's. For just a moment, he saw something in her gaze that he couldn't quite identify. Not guilt exactly, but perhaps a kind of resigned determination. Then, she was gone, her sensible shoes making soft clicking sounds against the polished floor as she disappeared down the corridor. James remained at his post, but his mind was racing. Had he just witnessed the signal that Webb had warned about? 3 taps on silver. It could mean anything or nothing. Margaret had been serving the royal family since before Prince William was born. She had changed his diapers, helped him with his first riding lessons, been present at every major milestone of his life. The idea that she could be involved in any plot against him seemed impossible. Yet, as the morning wore on, James noticed other small things that began to form a pattern. A gardener who paused to adjust his cap while looking directly at the prince's window. A security guard who checked his watch twice in rapid succession while walking past the study door. A kitchen assistant who dropped a spoon and picked it up in what seemed like an unnecessarily elaborate manner. Any one of these incidents alone would have been meaningless. But, taken together, they suggested something that made James's mouth go dry with fear. It wasn't just one person who might be involved in whatever was planned for Prince William. It was multiple people, all coordinating their actions through these seemingly innocent signals. The weight of this realization was staggering. How long had this been going on? How many people within the castle's trusted staff were part of whatever conspiracy was taking shape? And, most importantly, what exactly were they planning to do? James discreetly activated his radio. "This is Mitchell. I need to speak with Webb urgently." Code yellow. Code yellow indicated potential confirmation of a security threat without immediate danger. A request for guidance rather than a call for backup. Within minutes, Webb appeared at the end of the corridor, approaching with the casual gait of someone simply making her rounds. As she passed James's position, she murmured without breaking stride, "Service Corridor B, 2 minutes." James waited the appropriate interval before requesting relief from another officer and making his way to the designated meeting point. Service Corridor B was one of the many hidden passages that honeycombed the castle, originally designed to allow staff to move through the building without disturbing the royal family's activities. Webb was waiting for him in the shadows, her expression grim. "What do you have?" James quickly described what he had observed. The tea service, the subtle signals, the growing sense that multiple staff members were involved in some coordinated activity. As he spoke, he could see Webb's expression growing more troubled. "You're certain about the signals?" she asked when he finished. As certain as I can be without more context. But Webb, if this is what I think it is, we're not dealing with one rogue employee. This is organized. This is planned. And it involves people who have been trusted members of this household for decades. Webb was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. James, I need to tell you something that doesn't leave this corridor. The intelligence we received, it didn't come from an outside source. It came from within the royal family itself. The words hit James like a physical blow. What do you mean? Someone very close to Prince William contacted us directly. They've been observing unusual behavior among the staff for weeks, but until now, they weren't sure what it meant. Your observations confirmed their suspicions. James felt the ground shifting beneath his feet. If someone within the royal family had noticed the pattern, it meant the conspiracy was either more obvious than he had initially thought, or it had been going on for much longer than anyone had realized. Who contacted you? James asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Princess Catherine, Webb replied. She's been watching, documenting, trying to understand what she was seeing. 3 days ago, she finally decided she couldn't ignore it anymore. The revelation added another layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. Princess Catherine, Prince William's wife, had clearly been conducting her own investigation into the suspicious behavior around the castle. Her decision to bring her concerns to the security team demonstrated both remarkable courage and a deep understanding of the potential threat to her husband. What exactly has she observed? James asked. Meetings between staff members that seemed to have no official purpose. Conversations that stopped abruptly when she entered a room. Changes in routine that served no apparent function, but seemed coordinated among multiple people. And, most concerning, she noticed that these behaviors seemed to intensify whenever Prince William's schedule included private meetings or appearances. James felt pieces of the puzzle beginning to click into place. Today's meeting with the foreign dignitaries. That's not a coincidence, is it? We don't think so. Whatever is planned, whatever these signals are coordinating, we believe it's going to happen this afternoon. The weight of responsibility pressed down on James with renewed force. In less than 3 hours, Prince William would be hosting a private meeting with dignitaries from several countries, a gathering that would normally be considered routine, but now carried the potential for something catastrophic. What's our plan? James asked. Webb handed him a small device that looked like an ordinary pen. This will record everything within a 20-foot radius. I want you to document every signal, every unusual behavior, every person who seems to be acting out of character. We need evidence before we can act. And Prince William? Does he know? Not yet. We've decided it's safer to keep him unaware until we understand exactly what we're dealing with. A change in his behavior might alert the conspirators that we're on to them. As they prepared to return to their posts, Webb placed a hand on James's shoulder. James, I want you to understand something. Whatever is happening here, it's bigger than just palace intrigue or employee dissatisfaction. The level of coordination, the number of people involved, the timing, this feels like something that's been planned for months, possibly years. James nodded, though the implications of her words were almost too large to grasp. As he made his way back toward Prince William's study, his mind churned with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. How many people within the castle's trusted staff were involved? What was their ultimate goal? And, most frightening of all, how long did they have before whatever was planned reached its deadly conclusion? The afternoons stretched ahead like a minefield, each moment bringing them closer to a confrontation that could change everything. James checked his watch. 12:47 p.m. In less than an hour, the most dangerous afternoon of his career would begin, and he would be the last line of defense between Prince William and a conspiracy that threatened to reach into the very heart of the British monarchy. As he resumed his position outside the prince's study, James caught sight of Margaret Thornley again, this time carrying fresh flowers for the arrangement in the main reception room where the afternoon meeting would take place. She moved with the same efficient grace she had always displayed, but now James saw something different in her actions, a sense of purpose that went beyond mere duty. The signal had been sent, the pieces were in motion, and somewhere within the ancient walls of Windsor Castle, A plan that had been carefully crafted over months or even years was about to unfold, with the future King of England as its target. The grandfather clock in the main corridor chimed once, marking 1 o'clock as James Mitchell maintained his vigil outside Prince William's study. The prince had finished his lunch and was now making final preparations for the afternoon meeting with foreign dignitaries. Through the crack in the door, James could see him reviewing security protocols with his private secretary, completely absorbed in the routine details that governed royal life. What Prince William couldn't see, what no one except James and Detective Chief Inspector Webb knew, was that the very people trusted to ensure his safety might be the ones planning to destroy him. James's earpiece crackled softly. All stations, this is Control. Dignitary convoy arriving in 15 minutes. Final security sweep beginning now. The castle came alive with activity as the afternoon shift took their positions. James watched each familiar face with new eyes, looking for signs of the conspiracy that Princess Catherine had first noticed and that he had begun to document. Every gesture, every glance, every deviation from normal routine now carried potential significance. At 1:12 p.m., something changed. James noticed it first in the way the gardener outside the window suddenly straightened from his work, checking his watch before making what appeared to be a casual adjustment to his radio. Then, almost immediately, a housekeeping staff member walking past the study door paused to retie her shoe, an action that would have been completely normal except for the fact that her shoelaces had clearly not been untied. The signals were accelerating. James discreetly activated the recording device Webb had given him, angling his position to capture the next series of coordinated actions. What he witnessed over the following minutes would later be described by security experts as one of the most sophisticated internal communication networks ever deployed within a royal residence. Margaret Thornley appeared again, this time carrying what seemed to be routine paperwork. As she passed the main reception room where the meeting would take place, she paused to adjust a picture frame on the wall. 3 small movements of her hand that matched the pattern James had observed during the morning tea service. Within seconds, a security guard at the far end of the corridor checked his radio twice in rapid succession. The pattern was becoming clear. 3 taps, 3 movements, 3 signals, all coordinating toward something that would happen during the diplomatic meeting. At 1:20 p.m., the foreign dignitaries arrived. Ambassador Elena Vasquez from Spain stepped out of the lead vehicle, followed by Trade Minister Chen Wei from China and Deputy Foreign Secretary Mikhail Petrov from Russia. Each dignitary was accompanied by their own security detail, creating a complex choreography of protection protocols as they moved through the castle's main entrance. James watched Prince William emerge from his study, transformed instantly from the focused administrator he had been moments before into the polished, diplomatic figure the world knew. The prince greeted each dignitary warmly, exchanging pleasantries in multiple languages with the ease that came from years of international engagement. "Gentlemen, and Ambassador Vasquez, welcome to Windsor," Prince William said, his voice carrying the perfect balance of formality and warmth that marked his public persona. "I trust your journey was comfortable." As the group moved toward the reception room, James fell into step behind them, maintaining the discreet distance that allowed him to observe without interfering. But as they walked through the castle's corridors, he became aware of something that made his blood run cold. The staff members they passed weren't just going about their normal duties. They were watching, not in the usual way that employees might glance at royal proceedings, but with a focused intensity that suggested they were monitoring something specific. A kitchen assistant counted the members of the diplomatic party twice. A maintenance worker noted the exact time on a clipboard as they passed. A security guard in an intersection nodded almost imperceptibly to someone James couldn't see down a side corridor. The coordination was subtle but unmistakable. Whatever was planned for this meeting, it required precise timing and multiple people acting in concert. James felt his pulse quicken as the full scope of the conspiracy began to reveal itself. The reception room had been prepared with typical royal precision. Afternoon tea was laid out on a mahogany table that had served the British monarchy for over 2 centuries. Fresh flowers, arranged by Margaret Thornley, provided splashes of color against the room's rich burgundy wallpaper. Everything appeared perfect, exactly as it should be for a diplomatic meeting of this importance. But James noticed details that would have escaped anyone not specifically looking for them. The flower arrangement was positioned slightly differently than usual, creating an unobstructed sight line from the main entrance to where Prince William would sit. The curtains had been adjusted to allow more natural light from the windows, but also to provide clear visibility from outside. Most concerning of all, the small side table that normally held backup refreshments had been moved closer to where the prince would be sitting. As the dignitaries took their seats, James positioned himself where he could observe both the meeting participants and the movements of staff throughout the castle. His earpiece provided a constant stream of updates from security teams positioned throughout the building, but he listened for any anomalies in the standard protocols. "Your Royal Highness," Ambassador Vasquez began, opening her briefcase to remove several official documents. "We're here to discuss the proposed trade agreements that could significantly impact our relationships moving forward." Prince William nodded attentively, but James barely heard the diplomatic dialogue. His attention was focused on a window across the courtyard, where a figure had appeared briefly before disappearing again. It was the same gardener who had been sending signals all morning, and he was no longer tending to plants. Instead, he appeared to be adjusting something that looked like a small antenna. James's mind raced through the possibilities. What kind of device would require an antenna? Communications equipment was the obvious answer, but what kind of communication would need to be coordinated with such precision during this specific meeting? At 1:45 p.m., 15 minutes into the diplomatic discussion, Margaret Thornley entered the reception room. "Excuse me, Your Royal Highness," she said with the practiced deference of decades of service. "I wanted to ensure the tea service was satisfactory. Would anyone care for fresh refreshments?" It was a routine inquiry, the kind of attentive service that the royal household was known for throughout the world. But as Margaret moved around the table, James observed the same subtle hand signals he had documented earlier. 3 taps against the teapot as she checked its warmth. 3 adjustments to the flower arrangement. 3 glances toward the window where the gardener had been working. Prince William thanked her with the distracted politeness of someone focused on important diplomatic matters. "Everything is perfect as always, Margaret." "Thank you." But James saw something in Margaret's expression that chilled him. It wasn't the satisfaction of a job well done or the quiet pride of excellent service. It was the look of someone checking off items on a mental list, confirming that everything was in place for something larger to unfold. As Margaret left the room, James made a decision that would later be described as either heroic or reckless, depending on who was telling the story. He activated his radio on a private channel and whispered a code that would alert Detective Chief Inspector Webb without raising alarm among the diplomatic party. "Nightingale is singing." It was a predetermined signal indicating that the threat level had escalated and immediate backup might be needed. Within moments, James knew that additional security personnel would be discreetly moving into position throughout the castle, ready to respond to whatever was about to unfold. The diplomatic meeting continued with discussions of trade tariffs and cultural exchange programs, but James was now operating on pure instinct and training. Every movement in his peripheral vision, every sound from the corridor outside, every change in the rhythm of normal castle operations was being analyzed for potential threat. At 2:15 p.m., 30 minutes into the meeting, the first unusual event occurred. A power fluctuation caused the lights in the reception room to flicker briefly. It lasted less than 3 seconds, but it was enough to make everyone look up from their documents. Prince William made a small joke about the age of the castle's electrical systems, and the conversation resumed normally. But James had noticed something during those 3 seconds of dimmed lighting. In the moment when everyone's attention was distracted, he had seen Margaret Thornley's reflection in one of the room's mirrors. She was standing in the corridor outside, not moving on to other duties as would be normal, but waiting, watching, timing something. The power fluctuation hadn't been an accident. It had been a signal. James began to understand the elegant and terrifying sophistication of what he was witnessing. The conspiracy wasn't relying on crude methods or obvious communication. Instead, It was using the normal operations of the castle itself as a cover for coordination. Power systems, staff routines, even the timing of official meetings have been subtly manipulated to create windows of opportunity. At 2:18 p.m., James made another disturbing observation. Ambassador Vasquez had been taking notes throughout the meeting, but her writing pattern had changed. Instead of the flowing script she had used during the first part of the discussion, she was now making small marks that looked almost like tally marks or coded notations. When she thought no one was looking, she glanced at her watch and made another mark. Minister Chun Wei from China had been equally engaged in the diplomatic discussions, but James noticed that he kept checking a small device that looked like a smartphone, but seemed to be receiving signals rather than messages. Each time the device vibrated softly, Chun would make a subtle adjustment to his position in the chair. Most disturbing of all, Deputy Foreign Secretary Petrov from Russia had been wearing what appeared to be a standard diplomatic pin on his lapel. But, as James observed more carefully, he realized the pin was actually a small transmitter. It was so sophisticated that it looked exactly like ceremonial jewelry, but it was clearly sending or receiving signals. The realization hit James like a physical blow. This wasn't just a conspiracy among palace staff. The foreign dignitaries themselves were involved. Whatever was being planned wasn't an attack on Prince William. It was a coordinated operation involving multiple nations, using the diplomatic meeting as cover for something far more complex and dangerous. James felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool March air flowing through the castle's ancient ventilation system. He was witnessing something that went far beyond a simple security threat. This was international espionage at the highest levels, using one of the most trusted institutions in Britain as its staging ground. At 2:25 p.m., Princess Catherine appeared in the doorway of the reception room. "I'm so sorry to interrupt," she said with a graceful poise that had made her beloved by the British public. "William, you have an urgent phone call from your father. Something about the children's schedule for next week." It was a perfectly reasonable interruption, the kind of family coordination that happened constantly within royal households. But James immediately recognized it for what it really was. Princess Catherine was implementing her own plan to extract her husband from what she had identified as a dangerous situation. Prince William looked mildly surprised, but stood politely. "Please excuse me for just a moment," he said to the dignitaries. "This will only take a few minutes." As the prince left the room with his wife, James faced a critical decision. His orders were to maintain close protection for Prince William, which meant following him wherever he went. But leaving the reception room would mean abandoning surveillance of the foreign dignitaries and potentially missing whatever action the conspiracy was building toward. Through his earpiece, he heard Webb's voice. "Mitchell, maintain position with the diplomatic party. We have the prince covered." The next few minutes would prove to be among the most revealing of the entire operation. With Prince William out of the room, the dignitaries' behavior changed dramatically. The careful diplomatic courtesy disappeared, replaced by urgent, whispered conversations in languages James didn't recognize. Ambassador Vasquez removed a small device from her briefcase and began typing rapidly. Minister Chen activated what was clearly a more sophisticated communication device than the one he had been using during the meeting. Deputy Secretary Petrov spoke quietly into what James now realized was not a decorative pin, but a highly advanced transmitter. But most shocking of all was what happened when Margaret Thornley returned to the room. Instead of the subservient palace staff member she had appeared to be for decades, Margaret now moved with the confident authority of someone clearly in charge of the operation. She spoke directly to each dignitary, coordinating their activities with the efficiency of a military commander. "Phase 1 complete," she said quietly. "Transition to Phase 2 in 90 seconds. James felt his world tilting as the full scope of the conspiracy revealed itself. Margaret Thornley, the woman who had served the royal family for 38 years, who had been trusted with their most private moments, who had been present at births and birthdays and state occasions, was not just a participant in whatever was happening. She was running it. The foreign dignitaries weren't visiting for diplomatic meetings. They were here as part of a coordinated intelligence operation that had been years in the planning, using the royal family's trust and the castle's security protocols as cover for something that James was only beginning to understand. Through the window, he could see other staff members moving with new purpose throughout the castle grounds. The gardener was no longer maintaining his cover of tending plants. Instead, he was operating what was clearly sophisticated surveillance equipment. Security guards who James had worked beside for years were coordinating movements in patterns that had nothing to do with protecting the royal family and everything to do with facilitating whatever Margaret and the dignitaries were planning. At 2:35 p.m., exactly 45 minutes after the diplomatic meeting had begun, James realized that he was witnessing something that would change everything he thought he knew about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of protecting those who trusted you most. The conspiracy wasn't planning to harm Prince William. They were planning to use him. And they had been preparing for this moment for years, carefully placing people throughout the castle, building relationships, earning trust, all leading to this single afternoon when the future of the British monarchy would hang in the balance. James reached for his radio, knowing that what he was about to report would shatter the illusion of security that had protected the royal family for generations. But as he lifted the device to speak, he heard footsteps in the corridor outside, and he realized that his surveillance had not gone unnoticed. The game was about to change, and James Mitchell was about to discover just how deep the conspiracy really went. The footsteps in the corridor grew closer as James Mitchell realized his surveillance had been discovered. Through the reception room doorway, he could see a shadow moving deliberately toward his position. His hand tightened on his radio, but before he could speak, a voice behind him made his blood freeze. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, James." He turned slowly to find Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Webb standing in the room's secondary entrance. But something was fundamentally different about her. Gone was the authoritative but protective demeanor he had known for years. In its place was the cold calculation of someone who had been playing a much longer game than James had ever imagined. "Webb." James's voice carried disbelief and the first stirrings of genuine fear. "What the hell is going on?" Margaret Thornley looked up from her coordination with the foreign dignitaries, and James saw her smile for the first time in all the years he had known her. It wasn't the warm expression of a devoted palace employee. It was the satisfied look of a chess player who had just moved her queen into position for checkmate. 12 years, James, Webb said, moving closer while keeping her hand near her service weapon. 12 years you've worked beside me, trusted me, followed my orders. And in all that time, did you ever wonder how I always seemed to know exactly where threats would come from? How I could predict security breaches before they happened? The realization hit James with the force of a physical blow. Webb hadn't been protecting the royal family from threats. She'd been managing those threats, controlling them, using her position as head of security to orchestrate exactly the kind of sophisticated operation he was witnessing now. "You're running this," James said, the words coming out as a statement rather than a question. "I'm facilitating it," Webb corrected. "Margaret here is the operational commander. I've simply been ensuring that palace security remained cooperative." Ambassador Vasquez closed her briefcase and stood, her diplomatic facade completely abandoned. "The extraction window opens in 8 minutes, she said in accented but perfect English. "Are we proceeding as planned?" "Extraction?" James looked between the faces surrounding him, trying to understand what he was hearing. "You're not planning to hurt Prince William. You're planning to take him." Margaret Thornley's smile widened. "Harm the future King of England? James, we're not terrorists. We're professionals. Prince William is going to come with us voluntarily, and he's going to do exactly what we need him to do because he's going to understand that cooperation is the only thing standing between his family and genuine catastrophe." The scope of the conspiracy was so vast that James struggled to process it. This wasn't a simple kidnapping or even a straightforward intelligence operation. These people had spent years, possibly decades, positioning themselves to manipulate the British monarchy at its highest levels. Margaret's 38 years of loyal service hadn't been loyalty at all. It had been the longest intelligence operation in modern history. "The phone call," James said suddenly. "Princess Catherine's interruption. That was part of this too." Webb nodded approvingly. "Catherine is remarkably perceptive. She noticed the patterns weeks ago, just as you noticed them today. The difference is that when she brought her concerns to me, I was able to redirect her investigation. James felt sick as he realized what Webb was implying. She thinks she's protecting her husband by getting him out of the room. She doesn't know she's delivering him to you. Catherine will bring William to the private office on the 3rd floor, just as I instructed her to do during their emergency phone call, Webb continued. She believes she's following security protocol to protect him from a threat in this room. She has no idea that she's actually moving him to where we need him to be. Minister Chen Wei from China had been silent during this exchange, but now he spoke with the authority of someone accustomed to giving orders. The timeline is critical. Every minute of delay increases the risk of exposure. James's mind raced through his options. His radio was useless. Webb controlled palace communications. His backup would be following standard protocols, which meant they were probably being misdirected just as effectively as Princess Catherine had been. He was alone in a room with some of the most sophisticated intelligence operatives he had ever encountered, and Prince William was walking into a trap that had been years in the making. "What do you want from him?" James asked, stalling for time while he tried to formulate some kind of plan. Deputy Secretary Petrov from Russia answered this time, his voice carrying the trace of an accent that suggested his diplomatic credentials might be more authentic than the others. "Prince William is going to make a very specific phone call to his father, the king. He's going to request that certain intelligence files be declassified and transferred to our custody. Files that contain information critical to ongoing operations in multiple countries. And if he refuses?" Margaret Thornley's expression hardened. "Then his children will have a very different kind of future than the one currently planned for them." The threat hung in the air like poison gas. James had seen many kinds of danger during his career in royal protection, but this was something entirely different. These weren't fanatics or criminals driven by ideology or desperation. These were professionals who had calculated exactly what price they needed to extract cooperation from the future King of England. "The beautiful thing about this operation," Webb continued, "is that it doesn't require Prince William to betray his country or compromise his principles. The files we need contain information about operations that officially don't exist. Intelligence activities that the government would be embarrassed to acknowledge. William will actually be doing his father a favor by making these particular problems disappear quietly." James realized he was witnessing a masterpiece of psychological manipulation. These people hadn't just infiltrated the royal household. They had crafted a scenario that would make Prince William feel like cooperation was actually the responsible choice. They had turned his sense of duty to his family and his country into a weapon against him. At 2:42 p.m., James's earpiece crackled with activity. "All units, we have movement on the 3rd floor. The prince and princess are proceeding to the private office as directed." Webb smiled and spoke quietly into her own communication device. "Package is en route. Confirm secondary positions." The voices that responded made James's heart sink. They belonged to security officers he had worked with for years, men and women he had trusted with his life and the lives of the royal family. The corruption wasn't limited to Webb and Margaret. It extended throughout the entire security apparatus that was supposed to protect the monarchy. "How many?" James asked quietly. "How many what?" Webb replied. "How many people in royal protection are working for you?" "Enough," was all she said. James made his decision. Whatever the odds, whatever the consequences, he couldn't stand by and watch Prince William walk into this trap. He lunged toward the room's main entrance, hoping to reach the corridor before Webb could stop him. He almost made it. Webb's training proved just as effective as his own. She intercepted him 3 feet from the doorway, and the fight that followed would later be reconstructed by investigators as one of the most professionally executed hand-to-hand combats ever to occur within the walls of a royal residence. James had the advantage of desperation and moral conviction, but Webb had the advantage of preparation and backup. Within seconds, 2 of the security guards he had thought were protecting the castle were restraining him with the kind of efficient brutality that spoke of extensive experience. "I'm sorry, James," Webb said, and to his surprise, she actually sounded like she meant it. You were never supposed to be here today. Your assignment was supposed to be routine. But your timing was unfortunate, and your observational skills are better than we anticipated." Blood ran from James's nose where one of the guards had struck him, but his mind remained focused on one critical fact. "Princess Catherine doesn't know," he said through swollen lips. "When she realizes what she's done, when she understands that she delivered her husband to you, she won't have time to realize anything," Margaret Thornley interrupted. "By the time Catherine understands what's happening, Prince William will have already made the phone call we need, and will be gone. The operation will be complete." Ambassador Vasquez, check her watch. 4 minutes until extraction window opens. James felt despair creeping through his consciousness like a physical illness. He had spent 12 years protecting the royal family, and now he was going to watch helplessly as the most sophisticated conspiracy in British history used that family's trust and love against them. But then he remembered something that gave him hope. Princess Catherine hadn't just noticed suspicious patterns among the staff. She had been conducting her own investigation for weeks. Someone that observant, that careful, that protective of her family wouldn't have walked blindly into whatever trap Webb had set for her. Catherine might not know the full scope of the conspiracy, but James was willing to bet she knew more than Webb realized. At 2:45 p.m., James's earpiece crackled again. "Control, this is Princess Catherine. I need to report a security concern." The phone call from His Majesty was not authentic. "Repeat, the emergency call was not from a king." Webb's confident expression flickered for just a moment. She spoke rapidly into her radio. "All units, disregard previous instructions. Package is not cooperating as expected." Margaret Thornley's face had gone pale. "What do you mean, not cooperating?" "It means," James said, spitting blood but managing to smile, "that you underestimated the future Queen of England. The next few minutes would determine whether years of planning and infiltration would succeed, or whether the natural protective instincts of a mother and wife would be enough to save the British monarchy from its most dangerous internal threat in centuries." Through his earpiece, James could hear the sound of organized chaos as the carefully orchestrated conspiracy began to unravel. Princess Catherine's voice cut through the chatter with the clear authority of someone who had suddenly understood exactly what kind of danger her family was facing. "Security alert, all stations. Unknown hostile actors have infiltrated castle staff. Prince William's location is to be considered compromised. Implement Protocol 9 immediately." Protocol 9 was the emergency lockdown reserved for imminent threats to the royal family's physical safety. It meant that every entrance to Windsor Castle would be sealed within minutes, that armed response teams would be activated, and that no one would be leaving the castle until the threat had been neutralized. Webb spoke urgently into her radio, but the responses she received were not the coordinated acknowledgments of her conspirators. They were the confused questions of legitimate security personnel who were suddenly realizing that their commanding officer might not be who she appeared to be. "Ma'am, we're showing conflicting orders in the system," came a voice James recognized as belonging to Sergeant Phillips, a 20-year veteran of royal protection. "Princess Catherine has authorized Protocol 9, but your earlier instructions contradict emergency procedure. Please confirm your identity and authority." The conspiracy was collapsing with remarkable speed, but James knew that made it more dangerous, not less. Desperate people with years of investment in an operation would not abandon their objectives easily. Instead, they would accelerate their timeline and accept higher levels of risk to achieve their goals. Margaret Thornley was speaking rapidly into a communication device James had never seen before, coordinating what sounded like an emergency extraction plan. The foreign dignitaries were gathering their equipment with the efficiency of people who had rehearsed this scenario many times. "Window closes in 90 seconds, Ambassador Vasquez announced. "We proceed to alternative extraction or abort." "We don't abort," Margaret replied firmly. 38 years of investment does not get abandoned because of one perceptive princess. Webb looked at James with something that might have been regret. "I really am sorry about this, Mitchell. You're a good man, and you've been a faithful servant to the crown." But this operation is bigger than any individual loyalty. What operation? James demanded. What files are worth infiltrating the royal family for decades? It was Deputy Secretary Petrov who answered, and for the first time, his diplomatic mask slipped completely. Your government has been playing games in our territories for 50 years, supporting opposition movements, manipulating elections, destabilizing governments that don't serve British interests. The files we need contain evidence of operations that could embarrass your allies and compromise your intelligence networks for the next decade. James felt the final pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. This wasn't just about intelligence, gathering, or national security. It was about geopolitical revenge, using the British monarchy as both target and weapon in a conflict that spanned generations. The irony, Margaret said as she prepared to leave, is that we're not even asking Prince William to betray his country. We're asking him to clean up the mess that previous generations of his government created. Those files should never have existed in the first place. At 2:47 p.m., the sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor announced the arrival of armed response teams implementing Princess Catherine's Protocol 9 lockdown. But James realized that even with the conspiracy exposed, the danger was far from over. These people had spent years preparing for exactly this kind of emergency. They wouldn't be caught simply because their cover had been blown. Instead, they would implement whatever final protocol they had planned for mission failure, and James suspected that protocol would be far more dangerous than anything they had attempted so far. Webb drew her sidearm with practiced efficiency. Margaret, take your team to extraction point Beta. I'll handle containment. What about the primary objective? Vasquez asked. Secondary protocol, Margaret replied. If we can't get voluntary cooperation, we demonstrate the consequences of non-cooperation. James felt ice water flooding his veins as he realized what they were planning. If they couldn't manipulate Prince William into making the phone call they needed, they were going to create a situation that would force his hand through direct threat to his family. The conspiracy was about to become a hostage situation, and the stakes had just escalated beyond anything James had prepared for in 12 years of Royal Protection Service.